Hey y'all, welcome to Parent Power with Mandy Drogin. I'm Mandy. I'm just a mom sitting down with real Texans having real conversations about what's going on in our state. Today is a special episode because I am joined by my colleagues from the Government Reform and Oversight Coalition, and we are going to blow the lid on how you have fallen into tremendous debt at the local level and the education cartel that is spending you into oblivion. Please welcome Ben Crockett and Judge Shepard. Gentlemen, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having us.
All right. You all have been in the throes of massive in-depth research so that we can talk about the players that are part of this big ed cartel. That includes the taxpayer-funded lobbyists. That includes the bond salesmen, pushers, purveyors, and PACs. That includes, at the local level, even trustees, superintendents, and entities that are a part of this whole cabal that have run Texans into the ground with debt. So let's hear the number. How much debt do Texans have?
Well, I mean, starting off just at the local level, we're over $500 billion. And I mean, $500 billion with a T.
With
yes.
a T.
With a
trillion.
T. Yes.
$500 billion in local debt in Texas.
That's just local debt. Of that, about $236 billion of that is going to be from school districts alone.
$250 billion in debt from school districts. Yep. And this is the largest amount of ISD debt in the nation. We carry the largest amount of capital outlay in ISD debt in the country. Wow, this is insane. And this is all part of this cartel that we talk about. Architects, engineers, construction firms, consultants, taxpayer-funded lobbyists, all working together. No matter how many times the legislature has passed property tax relief efforts, somehow we just keep spending more and more money. So let's talk about it starting at the Capitol. I'm going to go to you first, Ben, and talk about taxpayer-funded lobbyists and their impact on legislation that affects every Texan at the local level. So let's hear what you've been finding.
Well, Mandy, first, thank you for the question. And I mean, we really have been going through the data here, over 2.5 million individual pieces of data, just to be exact. And one of the fascinating things that we've uncovered is the massive increase in the amount that political subdivisions are spending on taxpayer-funded lobbying. In the 85th session, it was somewhere between $20 and $40 million. But as recently as the 89th session, it's nearly doubled, going as high as $111 million that local governments are spending on lobbying.
They're taking taxes. They are confiscating them from Texans' bank accounts and sending them to taxpayer-funded lobbyists. For example, I will give one, and I would love for you to jump into others. Thomas Ratliff is one that I talk about a lot. He has been paid over the past decade over at least somewhere around $500,000. Thomas Ratliff owns a Ratliff Consulting. He's a former State Board of Education member, which would also explain how radical leftist ideology has made its way into our curriculum. But he also, his side hustle, his donation lobbying is to lobby for transgender policy supporting drag queens at the Capitol. So his son is some famous drag queen that has headlined fundraisers for Mondami in New York. This man takes taxpayer money to lobby for some private, a lot of taxpayer-funded entities, and he obviously works for nefarious, nasty people that want children to be exposed to drag. So that's one example. Ben, can't wait to hear what you got.
Well, Mandy, I think that's an excellent point. It's almost a political hijacking of public funds, and primarily for progressive causes. One of the things that we did in our research is we looked at what pieces of legislation have the most taxpayer-funded lobbyists opposed over the past 4 or 5 legislative sessions. And, you know, the ones in there, I think they'll surprise the audience. It's not just taxes or growing government. It's also SB 12 from the 89th regular session, which I know that you remember was relating to parental rights in public schools. At the same time, you also had the bathroom bill in multiple sessions being one of the most opposed pieces of legislation by taxpayer-funded lobbyists as judged by
our money. I want to make it clear that Texans understand this is your money that is effectively at the barrel of a gun, because if you don't pay your taxes, they're coming to take your house with cops with guns on their hips. So let's be clear. At the barrel of a gun, Texans are being forced to pay over $100 million to taxpayer-funded lobbyists, and so many of them, it's not like they just lobby for one entity, right? They lobby for lots of entities. So they collect $25,000 here and $100,000 there, and it adds up to millions. But it's coming from taxpayer pockets.
Yes, and I would add
to do these nefarious pieces of legislation that are completely counter to what Texans are asking from their elected officials.
And many of the local governments and political subdivisions that are hiring these lobbyists, they don't necessarily hide some of the things that they're advocating on. You can find some of them in those subdivisions' legislative agendas. And, San Antonio ISD is one example. They have been on the record saying that they support legislation allowing transgender students to work with their campus administrators to determine which bathrooms the students should use, end quote. That's from their...
one matching your genitalia and chromosomes, y'all. Let's just get that out there.
You also have different municipalities saying in their legislative agendas that they want to raise the age to purchase different firearms and enact different gun control measures. I turn to the city of Austin's legislative agenda where they make such a claim. Even Houston says that they support universal background checks, red flag laws, and raising the age to purchase semi-automatic rifles. That's from their 2022 legislative agenda. So both in terms of the bills that we see taxpayer-funded lobbyists on and the legislative agendas themselves from the different political subdivisions, we see some government-related issues, but a lot of very sort of political, ideological issues, including even abortion, which comes up in El Paso County's legislative agenda. Now, what a county has talking about issues like this, it doesn't seem to have any clear connection to their legitimate function as a county, but they speak about it nonetheless.
Would it be fair to say that with taxpayer-funded lobbyists, this is a way around for us to get around voters and the elected officials that we are trying to send to Austin to represent us, right? So Texas is a red state. I would say we're the most conservative state. As goes Texas, so is going to go America. We are a stronghold of American values, family, faith, country, freedom, all of these important values that we all hold dear. And so it looks to me that the system has been rigged by most of them, from what I can see, at least those making $5, $10, $20 million a year, they're former legislators or chiefs of staff or ledge directors. So it's like they get in and then they find a way to turn a profit after they've rigged the system. Is this what taxpayer-funded lobbying looks like to you? And it against our values, again, many of them seem to hold very leftist views from what you're talking about.
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, definitely. And it's more than just individual actors. There's a range of taxpayer-funded progressive nonprofits that are out there as well. And one example on the municipal level is the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. I mean, just think of the title there for a second. They provide anti-racism training to municipalities in Texas, and Austin has a contract with them that they signed in 2019 not to exceed $880,000 for this sort of training. And so we have not just taxpayer-funded lobbyists, not just former legislators looking to cash in, but also these progressive nonprofits that are getting a piece of the action as well.
Disgusting, infuriating. Now let's move over to Judge. I want you to talk about how all of this goes in. The number one issue concerning and plaguing Texans is these insane property taxes. People are struggling to put food on their table. It's destroying marriages. It's completely destroying the ability for families to operate because they are being taxed out of their homes. And it just keeps getting worse. And no matter how many times we've compressed or bought down or tried to utilize our surplus of our economically thriving state, somehow the profiteers, the arm of this cartel, those architects, engineering, construction, planning, consulting, lobbying, all of these entities, they find a way to rig the system where as soon as we give relief at the state level, they gobble it up like those hungry hippos. They just take it and they snatch it up. Talk to us a little bit about what's happening to drive up these absolutely asinine bond proposals.
Well, I mean, as far as for the bond proposals, I mean, kind of what my research has shown is basically, and Ben kind of mentioned it earlier, hijacking is a great word for it, because essentially the way the system works is, under the Constitution, Article 3, Section 7, that gives schools the ability to have capital bonds that paid for by property taxes. It's similar to a mortgage. You have to pay it off with interest. And basically what we've kind of determined is that it's the system of, putting together bonds and getting them passed has essentially been hijacked by numerous groups. I mean, your construction firms, architectural, as well as kind of some nonprofits and other PACs and things like that. Basically, the goal is to continuously pass bonds so that contracts are awarded, and then you'll see 2 or 3 years later, they'll go right back and ask for another one. And so basically, it's just continuously reaching into the taxpayer's pocket.
That's right. And basically, all of these people are the same exact exhibitors at the TASB, Texas Association of School Boards conferences, right? They're there. They're hosting casino nights. They're also at the Moat Casey Assessment Conference, the Texas Association of School Administrators Conference. We're all sitting here paying for all of these people to go get wined and dined, boozed up, given free Yeti coolers and a whole host of other stuff to sell these bonds, to form these relationships, to do business. Good old boy, wink, wink, nod, nod. So let's get into it. So I will point at one that I've talked about, but I know that you've been doing research into so many of these bonds, and we'll get to Conroe in just a minute. I want to start with them because there's a great group of leaders there that are incredibly frustrated about what's going on in Conroe, but this is across the whole country. Yes. So I know that we have, there's VLK Architects, which is one of the third largest, I think. Them and Huckabee in the entire country, from what they brag about. Their principal K through 12 executive, their most senior salesman, his name is Scott Milder. Some people remember him. He ran against Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick for office, and this is part of the Iron Triangle that they try and build. But his wife and him started Friends of Texas Public School with seed funding from Charles Butt, who has Raise Your Hand Texas and a whole host of other of these associations, and many of them taxpayer funded. But they also, their other side hustle is Friends Consulting Group. And so what Friends Consulting Group, they openly brag, the Milders who own it, they openly brag that over the past 20 years, they have a 94% success rate in coming in and passing bonds. So what we're doing is we're having a big workshop, we're buying dinner, we're inviting all the teachers and community leaders, and we're telling them that we need these palatial, completely ostentatious facilities, $50, $100 million sports facilities, middle school campuses that look like it was built, during the revolution, basically, when we're building these phenomenal small colleges and campuses. I mean, this is what they did. And so it goes from you plan it, or you come in, you rah-rah with Friends of Texas Public Schools, meet my husband with VLK Architects. Then we're going to plan it with Friends Consulting. And then we end up passing it. We fund the bond. We start the PAC. We fund the PAC. And then we end up with all these contracts for our big daddy boss, VLK Architects. But this happens at Huckabee, and this happens at others. So let's get into Conroe and hear what happened there.
So essentially in November of 2023, Conroe proposed 4 bonds. It's coming up to right about $2 billion. And so essentially, the PAC that was formed was the Community for Conroe ISD's Future. And so essentially kind of what we were able to do is go and track all of those campaign contributions to the PAC, and then turn around, and once the bond passed, all those contracts were sent out with the bond proceeds. Is basically identify, groups that both contributed to the PAC and then subsequently received a contract after the passage of the bond.
Sounds a lot like pay to play to me. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know, but I'm just saying, looks odd.
It definitely is. And it kind of gets back, the whole kind of the crux of the issue is that this is taxpayer dollars.
Right.
And that's what really is kind of the insidious kind of issue present there. And for just kind of going through, for example, I've got numerous examples here, both in this bond campaign and other ones, where basically, you'll have a group come in, make a modest, and I say modest, but $2,000 donation, and then turn around and end up with over $2 million worth of contracts received once that bond passed.
Within just a few years.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. Your research is just able to identify in the past couple of years. So that's not even the totality, the full usage of taxpayer dollars. It does look like pay to play.
That's $2 billion.
Is that just me? Like you're investing? Some of them are starting the PACs, right?
Yep.
But so $2,000 will get you to how much?
About $2,031,622
within just a few years.
Within that year. once the bond has been passed and once it goes through all the underwriting process and the proceeds are actually released, turn around and get a contract like that. Well, and as you mentioned, VLK, they're in here as well, $5,000 to the PAC, and they have subsequently received $2.5 million in contracts from them.
That's a good rate of return if you can get it.
That's phenomenal rate
That's
of return.
probably how they can afford to pay for all these casino nights and football nights and all this fun stuff that we as taxpayers pay to send our trustees to the trainings.
Yep.
Right? This is what's happening.
And that's kind of, you bring up a good point with that. You'll have groups like TASA, TASB, things of that, kind of groups of that nature. And essentially, they have these services that you can hire, your school board can hire them to come in and teach them, train them up on how the messaging should work to get a bond pass, things that you should say, things you should do, what you can and can't do.
Yeah.
And also, I've seen a little bit where basically, they've said use teacher raises as an incentive. Say this bond is going to fund teacher raises when in actuality it's not. It's a capital bond.
That's
so
right.
Therefore it can only go towards capital infrastructure such as school, land, buildings of that thing.
Right. So they lie. They just lie, right? And this is they'll lie, and we saw this play out with Brian Woods at Northside ISD, who, by the way, is now one of the executives at the Texas Association of School Administrators, because as a part of the cartel, you just get moved around, right? You do something naughty. This happened in Belton. They did the same thing as well, and their superintendent has been placed by, I don't know if it's the TASB executive search firm or the Mukasey executive search firm or the Welsh and Gallegos executive search firm, but it's one of the search firms, and then they just place him somewhere else. Bloop. And so that's what happened. But what we saw happen is there is a document, and it came from Raise Your Hand Texas, who, by the way, is also funded by Charles Butt, who funded Friends of Texas Public School, and they were telling superintendents and principals and leaders that you can track your teachers' addresses to see if that they voted in these bonds. And then they were sending out emails and threatening them. And yes, a teacher showed up at a school board meeting on camera and said, we're being told we're not going to get pay raises. When you can't do that with capital, right? This is why the total system has been rigged. And I want to get to the rigging of the financial system, which, by the way, we're waiting on the new numbers to come out. But in the 23-24 school year, we know that we spent $18,125 per student, or $100 billion in the state of Texas. So we're going to dig into how that system was rigged in just a minute. But, Ben, I want to get into what happened in the rigging with taxpayer-funded lobbyists. And I want to know roughly how many taxpayer-funded lobbyists do we know that we have? How many represent both public and private entities, like the architect, engineering, construction, consulting firms that are asking for these loopholes and these riggings to take place at the Capitol. Let's hear it.
So over our sample period of the 85th to the 89th legislature, we have roughly 1,080 taxpayer-funded lobbyists, which is out of a total of 3,500 total lobbyists. Mm-hmm. And then in the most recent legislative session, those numbers were somewhere around 500 taxpayer-funded lobbyists. And so this is a considerable block of lobbyists that have clients that are political subdivisions that are funded with public monies. Mm-hmm. But what concerns me the most about that data is those lobbyists that represent both private and public clients. One could imagine a situation where there's a bill that impacts a local school district. Mm-hmm. Let's say the bill is about building a stadium. Yeah. And that same lobbyist, the very same, so let's say that he represents a builder of stadiums. Yeah. Now, let's say that the bill is to create a standard design for stadiums in Texas, right? Well, does he want to make it more affordable for the school district, which would be, at least supposedly, their interests?
It'd be what taxpayers that are paying his bills want. Yeah.
Or does he help his friend that he also represents, that is the builder of those particular stadiums? And so when you have these mixed lobbyists that represent both taxpayer-funded entities and private entities, you get these interesting ethical conundrums that ultimately the loser is the taxpayer, as you pointed out.
That's right. I don't think they're interesting. I think they're so corrupt and disgusting, and the more people that can know about them, the better, because you should not be able to be, in fact, you're talking about it. Thank God that Chairman Aaron Kinsey at the SBOE and so many other leaders got rid of BlackRock, us investing in BlackRock and all their ESG nonsense and their woke mindset insanity. But I want to be clear, BlackRock is still here, and taxpayer-funded lobbyists also represent them, many that are, and one of them in particular is a former very, very high-level staffer who has one of the largest, most successful taxpayer-funded lobbying firms. And this is what we're doing, is we say we're creating, I mean, it's crony capitalism. We're creating crony capitalism to be able to do business in Texas, and it becomes a pay to play. If you can't afford $1 million, or you can't afford to have one of the most powerful people that probably wrote the legislation to begin with, then it's like tough cookies. I mean, that's really what we're seeing, right? I mean, that's what I see when I look at, you can pull up Transparency USA. I love that website because you can go and look up who all these people are and see who they worked with and what laws they passed when their leader was speaker or chairman or any of these things. And you can go, oh, funny, now you're lobbying for big business that gets to receive those contracts. It's corrupt and it needs to stop. Which is what I want to talk about with you, Judge, is let's get into one of the things that is causing all of these problems is school finance. Yeah. And you constantly hear from the Raise Your Hand Texas, the Pastors for Children, the American Federation for Children, all of these other entities that are just totally part of this education cartel. We just don't have enough money and more money. Meanwhile, Texas taxpayers are like, for the love of all things holy, how much more do we have to give you? I can't pay for milk that I want. I can't afford 2 jugs, but you're asking me to pay for a $150 million track and field stadium, which is what Crowley ISD did. So let's hear about where we are, how we got here. The last time the legislature took up the education funding, was in 2019. And I can remember watching it all play out. There was like a ticker tape parade in the Capitol. There were cups made. We've got these Texas Public Policy Foundation labels. It was like, this is the greatest thing ever. House Bill 3. It solves all the education problems. It was a whole hoax. It was a total hoax. But talk to me about how that process played out and what we're looking at now, where I have literally never met a trustee who can explain the funding formula. And I ask everybody, every single trustee I meet, do you understand it? Never met one to this day, but how did this happen?
Well, I mean, essentially, as you mentioned, the HB3 during the 2019 session kind of redid the whole school funding model. And kind of to your point, I mean, I don't understand how it works fully, and as you mentioned, I don't think anybody does.
I think there's about 10 people in the state that do.
And I think it's very interesting that I believe of those 10 people, I'm pretty positive a couple of them were involved in actually writing the bill and actually writing the formula. And so that kind of brings to mind of what were they thinking when they crafted this kind of in a way that only they could understand, only to have them subsequently, get out of the legislature and then go to firms like Moat Casey or other places like that where, obviously you're able to market your skills as an expert on school funding because you wrote the bill. Right. And so therefore you have basically locked in a financial interest where you're basically going to always be able to find some kind of work or money doing that because you're the one who put it together. Right. And so essentially by things like that, you have firms that are contracted by school boards, by ISDs, that help them understand, and how to work and how to actually this system works and how to make sure, you get supposedly you get the best bang for your buck. But by doing this, they've basically, once again, hijacking is a great word because they have hijacked the system, and basically you have to go to them for this. Yeah, so I want to dig into that a little bit more. So at that point, HB3, it was Chairman Dan Huberty that was chair of the House Public Education Committee. And the gentleman that you're talking about that worked at the TEA, Leo Lopez, he came out of Austin ISD, which we all know how that's going, as it's just hemorrhaging money, but I digress. So Leo Lopez is hailed this education financial expert. He's at the TEA. Of course, they have a hand in explaining the funding formula. And let me just break it down real easy for our viewers to understand. The funding formula is so convoluted because there are, whether you call them buckets or allotments or whatever, it is convoluted because you have like 50 different buckets. You've got golden pennies and copper pennies and maroon pennies and whatever pennies, silver and
blah, blah, blah. It just keeps going. But you have all these pennies, then you have all these allotments, then you have all these incentives, then you have all these different things. And they're all percentages. They're not actually dollar amounts. They don't actually want Texans to understand, what does a child with dyslexia qualify for? What does a child that is low income and needs additional supports? What does a child that's in this area or whatever? They don't want you to know. That is only for them, not for us, the taxpayers that have to pay for it. They're just going to sit there and tell us they need more. They need more, they need more. So that's what it is. It's a total racket, a boondoggle. It should not be done on percentages. It should be done on a dollar amount so that we can track it. Can you imagine keeping your own household budget and not actually seeing dollars? If you were just like, well, it's roughly 2% and it's only 1%, honey, that I spend on this, it would be a racket. So my point is that is a complete boondoggle. But then we also have the lobbyists, the taxpayer-funded lobbyists, right? And how many taxpayer-funded lobbyists do you roughly think work on education issues that could facilitate hands going into that taxpayer cookie jar to access those pennies and those allotments and all of that?
Well, it's likely that it's the largest bucket of taxpayer-funded lobbyists. And one of the ways that we can glean that information is just by looking at, like I said earlier, the bills that are most commonly opposed by taxpayer-funded lobbyists. And right down the line, it's education-related bills.
Hear.
So SB 2 is a great example from the 89th legislative session, which I know was something that you were deeply involved in, our school choice efforts. But then also the bathroom bill, as we've already mentioned.
So boys can't go in girls' bathrooms.
HB 100, relating to public education and public school finance from the 88th regular session. Mm-hmm. Down the line, you see a whole lot of education bills. Right. It's one of the largest categories. And when you ask these education groups, these education organizations, you mentioned TASB earlier, we can take that example. Just this past summer during the special session, there was a bill to ban taxpayer-funded lobbying. One of them advanced really far, and that organization put out a letter calling it community censorship.
That's right.
And I found that really interesting, Mandy, because when you poll Texans on how do you feel about taxpayer-funded lobbying, only 7% support it. Well,
7%.
7% support.
I don't know if there's anything else that gets
4 out of 5
93%. Yeah.
And you just think to yourself, well, if you're really elevating the voices of your community, don't you think you would listen to your constituents and get rid of taxpayer-funded lobbying?
No, because the taxpayer-funded lobbyists also have the political action committees that write the check that they can put out the lies, just like that. That is a great point, and that is exactly what's happening. Let's go back to the funding formula, which is causing the problem with our property taxes. So we talked about Leo Lopez, who was, I think he was the CFO or financial director. I don't know his exact title, but he was basically the senior financial guy at TEA. So, of course, he was advising. This is common with legislation. You go to TEA and get people that are experts in the issue. So they've got all their buckets and their pennies and they're all this other stuff. They're all percentages. Nobody actually knows how much money other than them. So that happened. It was hailed. It was a party. It was all the greatest thing ever. It didn't take long before they came back and said, but we don't have enough money. We need to pass billions upon billions of dollars of bonds. We're at $500 billion now across Texas, to be clear. But then what happened to the chairman of the House Public Education Committee and the chief financial officer, whatever his title exactly was from the TEA? Where are they now, Judge?
I believe they're at Moat Casey.
They're at Moat Casey. Mm-hmm. And what is Moat Casey?
Moat Casey is a firm that basically is education consulting or education consulting services. They offer numerous avenues where, especially where it goes to, school bonds or district personnel, school board trustee training, And essentially, they have found a way to basically kind of interweave their tentacles into every aspect when it comes to public school finance.
Not just public school finance. I see that they're doing political consulting now. They're going into bond invader consulting, according to some packet they've been handing out at the Texas Association of School Board TASB conference, which also we should point out that they participate there. I know that this is going to make them very unhappy when they watch this, but we talk about the fact they're at their own, I think it might have been their COO, I can't remember, Mr. Buck Gilcrease got up on stage and told many of our trustees from across the great state of Texas that according to the trustee that was there, Mr. Rob McClellan, who was in there, and dozens of others who called us, that we shouldn't be giving teacher pay raises. So this is all a part of why I say that this system has been totally rigged. But the good news for Texans is we can fix this. So Governor Abbott has a great plan for property taxes, which would include limiting the amount of debt that these ISDs can go out for. It would be just common sense. If you and I go and apply for a mortgage on a house to take out debt, they're going to look and see our debt to income ratio, and we can do the same thing and see the revenue coming in and how much debt you can actually take out. I really hope that we start telling taxpayers what to do. We also can redo the funding formula and make it easy using dollar amounts and not percentages. And we can be very honest about what it costs to educate kids from different parts of our state. That's the second thing we can do. And the third thing that we can do on this is to make sure that we bring our trustee training. The TEA has trustee training. You can already do it online. It costs no money. Taxpayers aren't paying for 3-4 day junkets to the JW Marriott, Kalahari Resorts, or Lost Pines, which, yes, that's where we're sending them. But here at Grock, our number one issue, Ben, is what do we have to do to make sure that we can pass these laws to stop this system from completely destroying the fabric of Texas, the middle class, our taxpayers that are absolutely devastated by the crushing debt burden that the cartel has put them under.
Ban taxpayer-funded lobbying. And the way I think of it is, if you care about school choice, ban taxpayer-funded lobbying. If you care about housing affordability and the Texas dream of homeownership, ban taxpayer-funded lobbying. If you care about property taxes, ban taxpayer-funded lobbying. When you look at the issues that are most important to Texans and who's opposed them consistently year after year, taxpayer-funded lobbyists.
That's it. That's the secret to all of this. Because we should no longer allow for those that created the system at the legislature, be it as a legislator or as one of their senior staff members, to rig it to go out and profit off of us. It is by definition, the closest thing that I can think of is arsonist firemen. And we have them everywhere. They are lighting fires for Texans to have to pay to put out. This is what we're happening. So you hit the nail on the head. Ban taxpayer-funded lobbying. Judge, what do we need to do to deal with this cartel that is creating the planning committees, hosting the planning committee nights, creating the political action committees that's always for the kids or for the future or whatever boondoggle they can rig, and then receiving millions of dollars. I mean, we were looking at some of the research that you had showed me, and it is for every $1 that they were giving in a political action committee, they're ending up with $15,000, $16,000 in return. What do we have to do?
Well, the good thing is, we've found kind of some solutions to this problem, and some of them haven't been filed in the legislature in past sessions. But basically, you can kind of boil down about 4 or 5 things. Number one, at the local level, putting it at the same standard as the state. So under state law, if you hire a consultant to prepare, an RFP or something similar of that nature, they can't turn around and then bid on that RFP or that contract.
That seems like common sense.
That should be established at the local level with respect, to the political action committees. If you make a donation to a political action committee in support of a bond, you shouldn't be able to turn around and get that contract if that bond does pass. That's number one. Number two is definitely going to be, we need a cooling off period. And so essentially what we've kind of seen multiple times all over the state is you'll have a May election for a bond proposal, it'll fail. They'll kind of change up the messaging, maybe alter the funding a little bit. Sometimes they'll even increase the funding. And then within 6 months to a year, they're right back with another bond election. And so it's repeated behavior of just continuously coming back to the taxpayer, reaching in the pocket again. And so that having a statutory cooling off period, regardless of if a bond passes or not, within 6 months or a year, you can't put up any more bonds after that. And so that's number two. Number three would definitely be, like you see in the 89th legislature, there are 2 bills, SB 2527, or 2572, was that first one, basically putting the local level on the same playing field as the state when it comes to conflicts of interest for contracts. HB 506, which basically would have prohibited nonprofit state associations or organizations that primarily represent school boards from basically having these risk management funds or things of that sort of nature. That way, once again, we're getting the conflict of interest out, we're increasing transparency and promotion. And then essentially kind of the biggest thing that has been mentioned in the governor's plan, especially with regard to bond, is number one, moving them all to the November election, the November general, because we typically have higher turnouts during that, as well as raising the threshold. So under Texas law currently, for a simple bond measure, a simple majority is needed. And as we've kind of seen through some other research papers that some of our colleagues here at TPPF have put out, raising that threshold from 51% to 60% would have basically saved the tax. And when you look at the 2024 bond elections, just off of that, if we would have raised the threshold, we'd have saved the taxpayer $22.9 billion.
Wow. $22.9 billion. We have to do that.
Yes. And
that's massive. That is real money coming out of Texans' pockets. Wow. These are great recommendations. The only other thing that I would say is that we have to break the TASB, Texas Association of School Boards, monopoly. I was looking at one of their things recently, and they have it's 20 different entities that effectively are all of our school districts. We have over 1,200 school districts in the state of Texas, and they're going and using them when the state has way better, lower cost options, whether it's the school board training, we have investment pools. They have the risk fund that was started, and this is a total racket where, according to one of the few, there's less than 5 insurance lawyers that are certified with LLMs. One of them I had on my show named Mr. Mark Gravely, and he talked about the fact that he thinks it's extortion because TASB and TML has exempted themselves from the good faith clause that every other insurance company has to use, which explains why every single school district is like, we hate them. We don't want to be with them, but we can't get any cheaper insurance. This is a racket. You should not have a monopoly. It's the closest thing to what Bell South was doing in the telephone industry. And we absolutely, and of course, that was, they paid Ratliff and a whole host of other taxpayer-funded lobbyists with our money. Because to be clear, ISDs are effectively forced, when we're talking about this risk fund where you can't get it cheaper anywhere else, to go to this entity, and then they can just disperse out the money to lobbyists with our tax dollars to advocate against our desires, wishes, values, and pocketbooks, bank accounts. This is what's happening all across the state of Texas, and we absolutely have to go after it with y'all's great research. When and where can our viewers get this great research?
They're ready now.
They're ready now. All right. So we're going to say the quiet parts out loud and name some names in these reports for everybody. All right. Before we wrap up, I want you to look in that camera. I'm going to start with you, Ben. I want you to tell the leaders of Texas, the legislators, and the patriots of Texas what we have to do to ban the abhorrent practice of taxpayer-funded lobbying and what needs to happen in the 90th legislative session.
As we approach the 90th legislative session, as 2027 gets closer upon us, our friends in the Texas House, the Texas Senate, and patriots all across the state need to amend the government code to prohibit the practice of taxpayer-funded lobbying. That is to say that registered lobbyists shouldn't be able to use public funds for the purposes of influencing political advocacy, legislative measures, or executive action. Many bills have been proposed in the past to do so, but with your help, this next session could be the one where it finally happens.
Thank you, Ben. I appreciate that. Judge, you're up. What do we got to do in the 90th legislative session?
Definitely for the 90th legislative session, if we want to get a handle on the reins here when it comes to bonds, we definitely need to implement some key reforms. Number one, we need to have redo conflict of interest when it comes to these contracts, or not contracts, PACs and bonds, as well as we need a cooling off period, we need a higher voter threshold, and we need more Texans to be aware of what is going on.
Gentlemen, thank you for your incredible research. I am so grateful to have patriots like y'all that are willing to say the quiet parts out loud, take on the ugly crony capitalists that are destroying the lives, quite frankly, of Texans that feel the pressure, the values of our families that we want to pass down to our kids. I'm grateful for all the work that you've done. I'm so excited for the entire coalition that we have built for Government Reform and Oversight Coalition, and I think we are going to have thousands of Texans showing up to support the policies that y'all are putting forth. So thank you so much. Thank you for joining us today on Parent Power with Mandy Drogin. And now you have the power.